colorless cards and the lands, which are technically colorless cards, but it's nice to, we I like to give the lands their shine. Okay, lands aren't everything in limited usually, but yeah, that's what we're doing. It's usually a short section, but this set has a little bit more stuff going on in colorless than usual. If you have not been to one of my servers before, these are the tiers I use to grade the cards. They're a little bit different than your traditional Magic limited grading system, but I like the tiers a lot. Um, they leave a lot of room for discussion, which I think is just kind of a nice. It's nice to have that room for maneuverability. Um, we're just gonna get started with Breaker of Creation, 6/2 colorless mana for an 8/4. You cast the spell, you gain 1 life for each colorless permanent you control, and is hexproof from each color and Annihilator 2. So, you know, this is essentially just like a really large hexproof thing, right? But there are devoid spells that can interact with it, right? I don't know. I think there's a couple of devoid removal spells, not a ton of them, um, and this only has 4 toughness, so it doesn't even block very well. So, and it probably only gets to attack like once. So, this card, I mean, it is going to be castable, right? It's an Eldrazi. It has a lot of things. Like I have this in tier 4 right now, but I just think that there's better big things than this that are more versatile. 2 colorless mana is a lot of colorless mana. Like yes, it just sacrifices 2 spawns and then you can cast it. And I do believe that the set designers have probably done a good enough job of making spawn tokens so that you can cast this reliably on like turn 6 or turn 6 is somewhat reasonable. And I guess you're gaining a bunch of life because it gains life for each land you have, and when you attack, your opponent's kind of going to be in bad shape. Hexproof from each color. All right, you know what? I'm gonna bump it. I'll bump it up 1 tier. I've convinced myself. First card, we're already moving the tier list around. That's always good. It's always a good. That always bodes well for me. Grading the cards well. But I just kind of talk myself up into like in the decks that are trying to go big and ramp and do that. This is a fine card to be a finisher, and you're not going to play it anywhere else. The colorless mana scares me more than I think it needs to. It is this is kind of like a blue green hybrid card essentially. So you could look at this. You're not going to play this outside of those colors, I don't think. So in those decks, I think this is an okay card. And that's it. That's my take on it. Devourer of Destiny, 5 and 2 colorless mana for 6/6. You may reveal this card from your opening hand. If you do, look at the beginning. Look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may put one of those cards back on top of your library and exile the rest. When you cast this spell, exile target permanent that's 1 or more colors. So again, there is the void stuff, but that's not super relevant, right? Like that's not like the most relevant thing ever. With like you're still going to have targets for this ability, and you're going to be happy about it. So how good is a 7 mana 6/6 that exiles a permanent when you cast it? Pretty good. Again, and 7 mana is a little bit of a misnomer because you are going to be able to cast this for a little bit cheaper with the spawns, and this does do something from your opening hand. I think you are supposed to just reveal it. It's kind of like interesting because exiling cards from your deck is different than milling for a couple of reasons. It's the same concept of okay, I'm going to make my deck more consistent by exiling cards from the top so that like I know what's in my deck a higher percentage of the time. Um, so that's good, but exile is, and there is some stuff that pays you off for having stuff in exile. So I don't know. I think you're probably just going to do this every time. I think you're supposed to. Generally, when the game prompts you to take an action, just take the action. So I'll just be taking game actions with this. The equity of your opponent knowing it's there is a thing, but there's not like it's sort of like a removal spell. Like, it's like, oh well, there's there's a little bit of play, right? Like it's like you could not do it if your opening hand is like perfect. Like I don't know. I think you're supposed to reveal it. But it's interesting. There's interesting. I think there's like a discussion to be had about whether or not you're supposed to reveal this in your opener. Drownyard Lurker. 7 colorless mana for a 7/7 with Vigilance. When you cast or cycle it, you create a Eldrazi spawn creature token. It is cycling for 2 and a blue. Yeah, I mean, this is solid. I like this. It works on both ends. It's a big thing you can cast that isn't particularly amazing, but it's also like gives you the ability to cycle it away. 3 mana to cycle is a lot, but you're making a spawn on the back end of it, and it's a nice thing to do when you hold up your mana and your opponent doesn't cast anything. So like you can't, counter their spell. Okay, whatever. Um, so you just cycle this instead and make a thing and continue on with your life. And there's just this is the type of big threat that I want in my deck that's like paying me off for casting big stuff because there are payoffs for that. Echoes of Eternity. 3 and 3 colorless mana for a kindred enchantment. If a triggered ability of a colorless spell you control or another colorless permanent you control triggers that ability triggers an additional time, and whenever you cast a colorless spell copy, you may choose new targets for the copy. So this is really sweet when it works. The problem is it's 6 mana to like not do anything, and 3 of that mana is colorless, which is not the easiest, even if you have a bunch of spawn tokens. Once this is on the board and does something, it's great. But the problem, there's also a lot of like enchantment removal incidentally running around, so I just don't even think this is a dream that is worth trying to dream. Eldrazi Ravager, 5 and a colorless for a 6/6 with Annihilator 1. You can sacrifice 2 Eldrazi to return it from your graveyard to your hand, and it has cycling for 2. It's actually like kind of like 6 mana is like doesn't there's not as many payoffs for 6 mana things as there is for 7 mana things, so I don't know, but still fine. Like it's still just a big thing that you want in your deck with big things. Similarly replaceable. Cycling 2 is easier to cycle, but it's a little harder to cast. It's fine. It's fine. I don't think this is anything special. Emrakul, the World Anew. 12 colorless mana for a 12/12. When you cast the spell, gain control of all creatures target player controls. It has flying protection from spells and from permanents that were cast this turn. And when it leaves the battlefield, sacrifice all creatures you control. And it is Madness, which you can pay 6 colorless mana, which is not a thing that matters unlimited because you can't. A, you can't get 6 colorless mana, and B, you can't actually discard this reliably. So, yes, when you cast this card, you're going to win. Yeah, you're probably going to win, right? Like it's hard to deny that gaining control of all of your opponent's creatures is really really good, and like this thing just doesn't die. The problem is getting to 12 mana consistently. And yes, there's spawn tokens and whatever, but even with spawn tokens, like you have to make, let's say you make 1 spawn token every other turn of the game for like whatever amount of time, and you hit your land drops 75% of the time, maybe 80% of the time. So on turn 8, you have like 6 lands and 4 spawn tokens, and you didn't use the spawn tokens for anything else, and they're just sitting there, and your opponent didn't interact. So you're at 10 mana on turn 8. I just don't think you're going to be able to get like in the game is where you get there. If you engineer your whole deck to try to do this, I think you will be able to do it, and you will win the game when you do. I just think it's going to be really hard to not die because the creature power level is so much higher that I think you're just going to have to do something else with your mana before you can put it all into this. And 12 is a lot. 12 is a lot of mana. So I don't know. I'm happy to be proven wrong about that, but I don't think it's going to happen. Glaring Flesh Raker. 2 mana colorless for a 2/2. When you cast a colorless spell, you create a 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature token. And whenever another colorless creature enters the battlefield under your control, this deals 1 damage to each opponent. So I originally was lower on this because it's a 3 mana 2/2. But there is a lot of devoid spells. There's a lot of other miscellaneous colorless stuff. And I think it's kind of a sweet engine thing. I don't think it's great, but I do think it's kind of a cool little micro engine that, like once you make one Eldrazi token, you feel pretty good. You feel pretty good about what you did here. You feel like not bad about it. And if you make two, which isn't completely unrealistic, although this is just going to die in removal, like again, this eating a removal spell isn't the worst outcome. This kind of looks like Nimble Brigand to me, in so many ways, where it just it doesn't really do anything, but it threatens to do quite a bit of damage and making mana. And there's enough colorless spells in the set with Devoid and other stuff going on that it's what why is my anyways I'm getting I'm looking at myself in the camera and being very confused. So yeah, I think this is fine, but it is a 3-mana 2/2. Heragast Erupting Nullkite. 9 colorless mana for his 6/6. It's not 9 colorless mana, it's 9 mana for 6/6. With Emerge for 6 red. When you cast this spell, you may exile your hand if you do draw 3 cards, and it is flying. Each creature spell you cast has Emerge. The Emerge cost is equal to its mana cost. So, I just like. I don't like Emerge. I think Emerge kind of sucks. Yes, this is getting a discount when you Emerge it, which is kind of weird. So, you could cast this for sacrifice your 3-drop and cast it for 5, and then you exile your hand and draw 3 cards. Yeah, okay, fine. I'll move it up a little bit. I've moved it up a little bit. The merge stuff in Shadows over Innistrad Remastered was kind of bad, and didn't this is not a colorless card. This is a red card. Basically, is how you should think about this. The thing is does red really want this? And I'm like, not really. I don't know. Red's kind of doing different stuff than what this is trying to do. It's a large dragon that comes down on turn 5 when you sacrifice your 3-drop, and that's okay. It is a real cost to sacrifice your 3-drop. This doesn't really have any other effects. Yes, your creatures you could do some there's some sweet stuff you can do with it, but I think it's just mostly a big flyer that does give you card in the if you get all your cards on the board and then you sacrifice something and cast this on 5 and you get to draw a card or two off of it. Just say your hand is 1 or 2 cards left, and then you just get rid of them and you get to draw 3 more cards. I think that's actually pretty good. So I'm gonna put it in tier 3, but I'm not excited. There's no excitement. There's no passion. Yeah. It that heralds the end. 1 and a colorless for a 2/2. Creature spells you cast with mana value 7 or greater cost 1 less to cast, and other colorless creatures you control get +1/+1. This is a really good enabler. It does literal nothing by itself, basically, though, right? That's the one thing that I don't like about this is it's just a vanilla 2/2, and again, it just kind of dies to everything. But it's cool, and it is again it making your expensive stuff cheaper. There's the dream big deck. I think is a deck that is real. It is a real deck. It can come together. There's a lot of uncommons you need, but I don't think it's unfeasible to believe that you couldn't get this off the ground. Kozilek's Command. X and 2 colorless mana for a Kindred instant. An Eldrazi instant. Anyways, choose 2. Target player creates X 0/1 colorless spawn tokens. Target player scries X and then draws a card. Exile target creature with mana value X or less, and exile up to X target cards from graveyards. So you're going to want a pretty big X value, but you can always say, okay, I'll pay 2, scry 2, draw a card, make 2 0/1s. Sure, that's 4 mana total for that. It's not amazing. But just the fact that you can maybe get rid of creatures and just the flexibility of it, I like quite a bit. It is colorless, again, the caveat if you need colorless mana to be able to cast it. I think that's going to hurt its win rate considerably, but in the aggregate, but I think that in decks that can actually cast it reliably, I think it's going to be pretty good. I'm happy with it. Kozilek the Broken Reality. 9 colorless mana for a 9/9. When you cast this spell, and up to 2 target players may each manifest cards from their hands. For each card manifested this way, you draw a card. Other colorless creatures you control get +3/+2. So the big problem with this card is that when you cast your 9-drop, how many cards are you going to have left in your hand? And it's not that many. Obviously, it's sick if you somehow have 2 cards left in your hand when you cast your 9-drop. But I don't know. The other colorless creatures you can draw get +3/+2 is pretty good. Turns all your spawns into 3/3s. I don't know. It's not bad. Like, again, this is another one of those cards that like I'm looking at and I'm like, am I underrating this because like is it more castable than I think? And then I'm like, but like you got to get to 9 mana and you need to have 2 cards in your hand or at least 1 card in your hand. You can prevent like you don't have to have your opponent manifest cards. It's fine, but like. And again, if you do the thing, if you cast this and you manifest 2 cards and draw 2 cards, it's completely broken. But the problem is that you need to get to 9 mana, and maybe that's just maybe like there's again we've talked that there's been several things that are like, oh, this reduces the mana cost. You can make the spawns, you can do this, but I'm not necessarily so worried about the 9 mana. I'm so worried about the like 9 mana and having 2 cards still. That's the part that I'm worried about. So I'm going to leave it low for now, and maybe you get proven wrong. Maybe you just get absolutely owned. It's happened before. No elemental blast. Colorless mana for an instant. Choose one. Counter target multicolored spell. Destroy target multicolored permanent. This is actually even worse than it would be in a normal set because there's just devoid multicolored stuff, and there's just not that many multicolored spells. So moving on. Null Drifter. 7 colorless mana for a 4/4. When you cast the spell, draw 2 cards. It has Flying and Annihilate for 1 and Evoke for 2 and a blue. So this is kind of a blue card. But I mean, this is one that you could probably play this in like any deck, like not having Evoke, or just have like a 1 or 2 pips of blue mana in your deck somewhere floating around so you can evoke it. I mean, 7 mana 4/4 that ETBs draws 2 cards. It has Annihilator 1 and Flying. Like this thing is going to take over the game. Like it's really really good when it is on the battlefield, and it's not that hard to get there. So I like this one a lot more just because 7 is kind of the magic number, and this thing is 7 mana. Twisted Riddle Keeper. 8 colorless for a 5/5 with Emerge for 5 colorless and a blue. When you cast the spell, tap up to 2 target permanents. Put a stun counter on each of them, and it has Flying. Again, with the Emerge stuff, I'm just not. There's just no excitement about Emerge for me. Maybe it'll be good this time. Tapping 2 target permanents and putting stun counters on each of them is actually like a pretty impactful effect on your like 5/5 flyer. Like that's a lot of like your opponent's creature's not doing anything, and that's kind of it. That's kind of my take about this card. Is it's a lot like this does feel sort of replaceable to me. It's another like it's a big thing that you can cast and whatever. So there's kind of a critical mass of this like. It's like, oh, it's large. It's keyword. It costs mana. That's what it is. And I'm like, okay, like I just think this is like so similar to all the other ones. So, like whatever, like you can play it. It's fine. Ulamog the Defiler. 10 mana for a 7/7. You cast the spell, target opponent exiles half their library rounded up, and it has ward sacrifice 2 permanents. It enters the battlefield with the number of +1/+1 counters on it equal to the greatest mana value among the cards in exile. It has Annihilator X, where X is the number of +1/+1 counters on it. So, again, 10 mana, it's probably like a 11/11 on average-ish, probably. Maybe it's a little higher than that on average. Maybe it's a 12/12 on average. Somewhere between 11 and 12. Annihilator 4 or 5. And exile half of your opponent's library, which is never as good as it sounds. And yes, it has ward sacrifice 2 permanents, 10. All these big Eldrazi are either going to just be, I'm either going to be very right about them or I'm going to be completely off and they're going to be busted. This one in particular looks kind of bad because it's just one guy that's big. It just dies to removal. Well, you got to sacrifice 2 permanents. When I'm killing my opponent's 10-drop, I probably don't need my lands anymore. Like, I probably don't need 2 lands when I'm killing my opponent's 10-drop. So, I don't think that word cost is actually as bad as it sounds. I think it would actually maybe even be better if it was, mana and limited. I don't like. Yeah, if it ever attacks you in the game, great. I don't know. Warped Tusker. 7 colorless mana for 6/8 with reach. When you cast or cycle Warped Tusker, create a 0/1 Eldrazi spawn token, and it has cycling for 2 and a green. I do love Red Scale Tusker. It's true. I do. I love it. I play Red Scale. They put Red Scale Tusker in MKM, and man, when you cycle a Ridge Scale Tusker, ooh, yeah, that's the stuff right there. Is this? I mean, this is good. I actually, I don't have like a problem with it. It's nice. It's solid. Again, it's another big thing. I like these. I like the ones with cycling slightly more than the ones without cycling because they're just the fact that you have the option to not do this and then it also enables your other stuff by making a spawn token is really nice. And yeah, Wastescape Battle Mage. 1 and a colorless mana for 2/2 with kicker for green and or 1 and a blue. And if you kick it for green, you exile an artifact or enchantment an opponent controls. If you kick it for blue, you return a creature an opponent controls to its owner's hand. So you can't infinitely destroy all their artifacts and enchantments with this. Sad. But yeah, I mean, this is a nice, flexible, colorless thing that is a 2/2. So I don't know. Oh no. Yeah, I don't know what was going on there. I'm gonna be honest with you. I don't know why it did that. The Battle Mage is mad at me. But yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of these cards that I think I'm rating kind of like low. Like they're like, oh, everything's a tier 3, everything's average, and it's like, well, I don't know. Like it's just they all seem kind of mid. I will have to see how like there will be some that will be a cut above and some that won't. And it's just kind of like for me, I'm like they all kind of look like they fit into this blue green deck, and like I'm not super excited about that deck, so I'm not super excited about those cards. I guess. On to the artifacts. Disruptor Flute. 2 colorless mana for an artifact. It has flash. When it enters the battlefield, choose a card name. Spells with the chosen name cost 3 more to cast. Activating ability sources with the chosen name can't be activated unless they're mana abilities. This is just a 2 mana Pithing Needle Unlimited, not a playable card. Emerald Medallion, and this represents the entire Medallion cycle. 2 colorless mana for an artifact. Green spells you cast, spells once to cast. All of these are reprints, and they are, you have to, like, just think about it, right? You have to cast 3 spells before you get your mana back, and that's just not a thing that is worth it, limited for an entire card. Idol of the False Gods. 2 colorless mana for a artifact that is in an Eldrazi. Why? It's a tribal artifact? That's not. Is that even? That's not even. That doesn't make sense. Whatever. I guess it's an Eldrazi artifact, but like, I don't. Whatever. One of them colorless to tap it and create an 0/1 Eldrazi spawn creature token. Cool. And then you can, whenever another Eldrazi you control dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Idol of the False Gods. And whenever it has 8 or more counters on it, it's a 0/0 creature in addition to other types. It has Annihilator 2. I think this is too slow for the most part, unless you're going like really deep. But what you can do is don't do this. Don't just make a spawn token and then every turn you do the spawn token to make this like 1 cheaper to just like cycle and like get a bunch of +1/+1 counters on it. I don't know. It's kind of sweet. It is like it is big, but the problem is it's just like it's 2 mana to do nothing, and it's like every turn I get paid 2 mana to do nothing again. Sign me up. You know what I mean? So it's like yeah, I don't know. It doesn't excite me, I guess. But it's cool card, but not super exciting. I don't really understand why this is an Eldrazi artifact because it becomes an Eldrazi, right? I guess it's not. It doesn't become an Eldrazi. Why template it like this? Why? Whatever. Junk Diva. 3 colorless mana for a 1/1 flyer. When it dies, return another target artifact card from your graveyard to your hand. Yeah, this is too slow. And there aren't that many good artifacts, so don't play it. Solar Transformer. 2 colorless mana for an artifact that enters the battlefield tapped. When it enters the battlefield, you get 3 energy. You can tap it to add colorless mana, and you can pay an energy to tap it to add 1 mana of any color. This is really sweet. I actually might move this up a tier Generally, 2 mana rocks are pretty bad in limited because again, like just you're going down a card to have a mana rock. This one does a lot of things that are good. A, it can add a colorless mana, really nice, and B, it gives you energy, and it does also fixing. So this does a lot of stuff. I still think it's going to run into the mana rock problem of, well, my mana rock doesn't do anything on turn 7. Oh no, I'm now down a card, and I'm probably going to lose. Like that does happen. That is a concern. But this is like a lot of fixing, and like it also like making energy is really good. I don't know. I'm still a little. I'm skeptical still. I'm skeptical, but I'm also excited. This is a really sweet cube card. I don't know. There's that. Urza's Incubator. 3 colorless mana for an artifact. When it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Creature spells and chosen type cost 2 less to cast. Um, Yep. Again, similar to the medallions, this card just is too. There's just not. You can't have a critical mass of creatures to make this functional. Vexing Bauble. Single colorless mana for an artifact. When a player casts a spell, if no mana was spent to cast it, counter that spell, and you can pay 1 and tap to sacrifice it to draw a card. Again, not something you want in limited. Honestly, 2 mana to cycle with on an artifact isn't that bad, but it's also not like why would you play this? Don't. There's just no need to do that. Winter Moon, another one. 2 colorless mana for an artifact. Players can't untap more than 1 non-basic land during their untap steps. There are a bunch of non-basic lands in this set, but yeah, still don't do this. Worn Power Stone, 3 colorless mana for an artifact that enters the battlefield tap, and you can add 2 colorless. I like this one. I like Worn Power Stone a lot, actually, in this set. Again, it has the mana rock problem I just talked about with the Solar Transformer, where it does. You are going down a card, but there is a lot of big stuff in this set. And if you are one of the decks that's trying to do all the big stuff, this thing, my God, does it do that? It also makes colorless mana, which again is relevant. Um, it has again. There's a push and a pull, right? It's like, oh, there's more big stuff in this set. Oh, there's also like an outsized amount of like artifact hate that's incidental and good in this set. So it kind of there's concerns on both ends of it, but I do think that ramping to 6 is something that, or ramping to 5 or 6 is something that's pretty good with one power stone. You will actually be able to do the thing. Like you can do the thing with one power stone. Archway of Innovation. It is a blue land that enters the battlefield tapped unless you control an island. You can tap it to add a blue mana, and you can tap it, pay blue and tap it to make the next spell you cast this turn have improvise. So obviously you need to have at least 3 artifacts in play that you're tapping to make this worth doing, but it's not completely terrible upside. I just don't think it's... Blue isn't really as much of an artifact color in this set. It's more red and black, so I don't think this is really where you want to be. Arena of Glory. Arena of Glory enters the battlefield tapped unless you control a mountain. You can tap it to add a red mana. You pay red and tap to exert it and add 2 red mana, so it's mana neutral. The mana spent on a creature spell, it gains haste until end of turn. So you can give up to 2 creatures haste. If you spend the mana correctly, it's going to be a nightmare on Arena to do that. But fortunately, the card is not so amazing, so you're not going to have to worry about that. There will be times that giving something haste is really good, and this land is like, it's really hard for it to be terrible, but I just don't think that the value proposition is high enough that I'm interested in this. Exerting your land is a really, like, going down mana next turn. It's kind of like Overload in Hearthstone, if you have ever played that. Overload is good, is a busted mechanic at times, but this to me does not feel like it's the juice is worth the squeeze here. Barbarian Ring. Tap to add red mana, it deals 1 damage to you, and you have Threshold red and tap it to sacrifice it. It deals 2 damage to any target. Yep. Paying 1 life for your mountain is really, really bad. Yes, the ability to deal 2 off your land is really good. I probably shouldn't put this in tier 5, but paying 1 life for your thing, like, paying 1 life for your land is really bad. Like, it's really bad. And It's like Threshold isn't just going to be on all the time. So I don't want this, but we'll see. The fetch land cycle, or the untapped fetch land cycle, it's the enemy colored fetch lands that are being printed again. Um, they are decent fixing. There's landfall, so actually, like these are probably a little bit better than they were in some of, like even in Khans of Tarkir, they're probably a little bit better than they were in that set. Um, they are good, but not amazing in limited. So they're fine, but nothing special. And then there's these fetch lands, which I think are probably slightly better than the other fetch lands, but in a similar category. They tap to add colorless mana. You can sacrifice them to search your library for forest, island, mountain in this case, and you could cycle for forest, mountain, or for blue, green, red. So there's one of these for each of the wedges. So there's 10 total of them, I think. There might not only be 5. I don't remember how many of them there are. I've graded them all the same. This is probably the best one. If I had to pick one of them that is the best, this is probably the best one. Whatever. The blue green ones are the ones that you want because they add colorless mana and colorless. Like this is really nice. It's really nice to have the ability to have an untapped land or fix your mana or like what I mean. It just does everything. I really like these. They're really nice. Again, they work with landfall and stuff too. So no complaints. Cephalid Colosseum is a land that taps for blue mana. It deals 1 damage to you, and if you have Threshold, you can sacrifice it, and target player draws 3 cards, then discards 3 cards, which is atrocious. This is worse than Barbarian Ring by a considerable margin, but I don't have a tier that's lower than 5, so I'm not going to be playing this card. Deserted Temple is a land that taps for colorless mana, and you can pay 1 and tap it. 1 and tap it to untap target land. I think this card is worse than a Wastes. In this set, there are some lands that do some stuff, but I don't know. You can untap your Exert land. Whoa, you did it. You really spent like 8 mana to give 2 creatures haste. We really figured it out. There's just better ways to get colorless mana than playing a land that only taps for colorless in your deck. We just saw those fetch lands. This is worse than those by a lot and just not necessary. Monumental Henge. Enters the battlefield tapped unless you control a plane, so you can tap to add white mana. You can pay 2 and 2 white mana to tap and look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal a historic card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest in the bottom of your library in random order. This is a nice solid value land. This is better than some of the other ones. I like it. You're going to have sagas, artifacts, and legendaries in your deck, but you're probably not going to be activating this unless you're either until you're in the way late game. But it's really low downside. Like if you're already in white and there's nothing else in the pack, I would take this. And if that's not the case, I would not take it. Nesting Grounds. Taps for colorless mana, and you can pay 1 and tap it to move a counter from target permanent you control to another target permanent. Activate only as a sorcery. So I should move this to tier 4, and I will do that. But, this is like a colorless land I can get behind. There's a lot of counter stuff going on in the set. There's a lot of green and white cards that just do something whenever they get a counter put on them. +1/+1 counter specifically. And it's 2 mana to move a counter around, and there are a lot of there's a lot of counters around. You can, if you have a saga in play, you can remove the counter, put it on one of your creatures so it doesn't do anything. The saga ability re-triggers. All kinds of stuff. I will move it down to tier 4 though, because I do think it's probably a little too situational. There, you happy? I moved it down to tier 4. I did it. Look, I'm not a dreamer sometimes. Okay, sometimes I'm just real. Sometimes I'm real about how I feel. Phyrexian Tower is a legendary land that taps for colorless mana, and you can sacrifice a creature to add 2 swamp, to add 2 black mana. I think that this can actually be something. Tapping for black doesn't care about colorless mana at all is the problem. If this was so here's the problem. Black is going to have things to sacrifice to this, but it doesn't care about the colorless mana. There are some other colors that care about the colorless mana, but wouldn't have things to sacrifice as much. So I don't know. It is a land that taps for 2 mana and has limited downside. So we'll see. I just don't think that having to sacrifice your creature to pay add 2 mana is good and limited. But sometimes, like if you play the two, like the black 2 drop, the 2 drop that makes a 1/1, like the 1/2 that makes a 1/1, and then on turn 4 you're playing a 5, or yeah, on turn 4 you play a 5 drop and sacrifice one of those tokens. Is that worth it? Maybe. I don't know. Maybe this is sweet and it does something cool, but I don't. I think it's going to be more niche than not. Shifting Woodland. Enters the battlefield tapped unless you control a forest. You can tap it to add green mana, and it is Delirium. 2 green. It becomes the copy of target permanent card in your graveyard until end of turn. Activate only if there are 4 more card types in your graveyard. So this land can turn into like a big creature in the late game, and then it can attack. Like it could just be a fit land that is like it's kind of like a creature land, sort of. A very situational creature land. But a very situational creature land isn't that bad. And like it can do other stuff sometimes too. So like, yeah, it's mostly like again, this is mostly a low downside forest, but it 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 just has really low upside. Wastes. It's a basic that is also colorless. You probably don't want these. So probably don't play them. Spymaster's Vault. It is a land that taps for black mana. It enters the battlefield tapped unless you control swamp. And you can pay black and tap it to have target creature you control connive X, where X is the number of creatures that died this turn. Again, like a low, like similar to the white one, I like this one better than some of the other ones. It's low upside, but it's also very low downside. I wouldn't pick this unless I was already in black, but if I'm already in black and there's nothing else in the pack for me, I would take it. And I would be pretty happy about it. Like, there's going to be some games where this does quite a bit. Connive is a powerful ability, and this is a land. Hugin's Labyrinth. It has Imprint. When it enters the battlefield, you may exile a colorless card with mana value 7 or greater from your hand. You can tap it to add colorless mana. If a card was exiled with Hugin's Labyrinth, you add 2 colorless mana instead, and you can tap it to return the exiled card to its owner's hand. So this land is an ancient tomb, right? But, again, limited, you don't want to be putting yourself down a card. I understand that you're not permanently down the card, but, like, yeah, I don't know. I just don't like this just seems like it's going to be too tough. Yes, there's tons of cards that are 7 mana value 7 or greater. Is it sweet if it works? Yeah, but you are like you're 2 for wanting yourself to put the land into play, and then in the late game you could turn it back into a land that taps for 1. I'm kind of talking myself into it. I'm thinking about talking myself into it. It's sweet when it works, but it is also just a colorless land. Again, lands that just tap for colorless are inherently kind of bad. Like, how good would Ancient Tomb be in Limited? It would be okay. I don't think it would be like completely game breaking because 2 life is a lot. Like 2 life is you're paying a lot of life. Like, 2 life. This similarly, you're paying a lot by going down a card, and you're not getting it. It's not permanent, but it is a long time to be going down a card. But maybe there's just a high enough mass of mana value 7 stuff. Maybe you can just make this work. We can see, but there's a ton of cards that are mana value 7 that are colorless. So it would be kind of cool if it worked, but I'm not. I'm skeptical. And then finally, the last card, Urza's Cave. It is a cave that taps for colorless mana, and you can sacrifice it to search your library for a land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. So again, not a limited ability that matters because there's not going to be lands that are good enough for you to be doing this for. And that's it. That's my set review. Thanks for joining me on probably the most boring of the days. There's not a whole lot for me to talk about with Colorless. I'm always like, oh, there's big stuff, and there's Colorless, and there's big. It's large. Feel free to go watch the rest of the set review um, if you like it, because it's good. Yeah, that's it. See ya.